My parents were concerned that I was dealing with this illegal drug, and they said, why are you focused on it? And I said, well, it's like magic. They said, well, what's it like? I said, the best way to know is really to try it.
Well, what is integration actually?
People really don't have bad trips if they're actually using real MDMA. The problem is that some of the MDMA out there is not real MDMA, and then people can have a bad trip with bath salts or methamphetamine, things like that. Ecstasy became famous as a couples therapy drug in the 1970s, and then it got into the rave scene and went on from there.
What you think the future of psychedelic therapy is as we shape our future?
I notice when I'm high on drugs, I'll often make this sound. It sounds like this. Yeah.
This is Willpower.
My guest today literally wrote the book Ecstasy as Medicine. Wrote the book on working with people and the use of MDMA in therapeutic settings. Jonathan Robinson is a psychotherapist, an internationally respected relationship expert, and the New York Times bestselling author of more than a dozen books, including Finding Happiness Now, Communication Miracles for Couples, and this groundbreaking work I just mentioned, Ecstasy as Medicine. For over 30 years, he's been teaching practical tools for emotional healing, deep intimacy, and personal transformation. And this conversation that we have, it's kind of just fun. It's fun to hear about how someone gives you a peek behind the curtain of the work that they do with, police officer units and various different people that you may not even have expected might be dabbling with this medicine in order to work and help themselves heal through PTSD and various other challenges. Jonathan's work blends psychology, mindfulness, and heart-centered awareness in a way that is both deeply practical and profoundly human. He taught at Stanford University. He's highly respected. He's spoken at organizations like Google and appeared frequently in major media. He's been on Oprah, CNN, New York Times. And what I appreciate most about his work is he's spent his life studying one of the most important questions any of us can ask. What actually helps people open their hearts, heal their wounds, and experience real love in their lives? This is a man who understands downregulation and the need for presence. And in recent years, he's become a thoughtful and courageous voice in the conversation around MDMA-assisted healing, exploring how this molecule, this empathogen, when used responsibly and intentionally, may help people access compassion, connection, and emotional breakthroughs that traditional therapy sometimes struggles to reach. We hit the intersection: psychology, intimacy, MDMA, and the future of heart-centered healing. And I'm so glad you're here with Jonathan and I. Welcome to Willpower. Thank you so much for being on the show.
I'm really looking forward to it, Kristin.
It's a beautiful month for all these listeners who are out here in the last 60 days even that we've been releasing and launching credible, beautiful professionals in the space of working with psychedelics and therapeutically sorting various different people's lives out and helping them heal themselves through the process of working with these medicines. And I'm just so honored to have you on the show after reading your book, after, seeing you present. And I really want to dive in today for the viewers and the listeners. I think I'd like to start with a question that might lean into your origin story, but it's a question about something you have gone through in your life that's been highly challenging, or something that may have brought up trauma perhaps in your life that you had to navigate that informed the work that you're doing today.
I like to say that I was blessed to have a very bad, violent childhood. And the reason I say that is because by the time I was 12 and I had tried running away from home because I was beaten up by my stepfather a lot, that I realized I couldn't leave my home. So I got into things like meditation and self-hypnosis and psychedelics by the time I was 13, figuring if you can't leave the situation, maybe you can leave internally. And so I got into this really early. My brother and sister did not. They both had been in and out of mental hospitals their whole life. So I luckily got into these things. I saw that they could steer me in a positive direction to overcome that trauma. And I then was able to make a living at it. And 16 books later, think life is good.
Yeah, so amazing. And this mess to masterpiece story, it's in many ways, I felt like a large part of my career, I couldn't talk about the mess that I had because it wasn't sort of a big enough mess. I had a relatively good upbringing and I had And then like you cut back to 2 or 3 years ago where I had this like what I would say like later in life dark night of the soul, which is what got me into all of this work.
Hmm.
And so it's just interesting to hear that how these things come up in different parts of our lives. But of course I had developmental years traumas that maybe I was like, I'm not going to look at those right now, as we all, many of us do. But just to see the story of the masterpiece that you've created for also helping so many other people by the things that you overcame is just incredible. When you talk about your first experience with psychedelics or beginning to get in at a younger age, what types of psychedelics were you playing with at that time?
Well, I actually started with mushrooms, magic mushrooms. And then by the time I was 16, I had tried LSD and MDMA. And, I was a pretty intelligent, nerdy kid. So when I tried MDMA, it really opened up a whole other world, as did LSD. I started to see, oh my God, there's joy and there's love in the world and there's feelings and all these great things. And some of my books have been about relationships. I'm happily married, and that wouldn't have happened without learning the power of empathy, learning the power of how to overcome trauma or how to connect deeply with people. And actually, my most recent book is Ecstasy for Couples because, as you probably know, MDMA is very powerful as a way to connect romantic relationships in a way that's really, healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And some things I've seen, and I'm much less experienced than you in many ways. And some things I've even seen in the containers that I've worked in are just like these aha moments over and over again of someone almost seeing their partner's pieces for the first time and
Yeah.
actually having oh, I had no idea it was like that. I know the story, but now like within my own down regulation, I think is what's happening with that person. It's like I really can take in my partner, my spouse, etc.
I never have couples come into my office and say, we understand each other really well. That's why we want a divorce. But couples often say, I just don't understand them. That's why we want to separate. But MDMA or ecstasy really helps people understand their partner in a way that even therapy normally doesn't do so well. A couples therapy especially can be a long, slow slog. So I feel like I can do more than 2 years of therapy or healing in one afternoon with MDMA.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful piece of that work. And just netting out on deciding that ecstasy, that MDMA was like the thing for you. And I think it'd be nice to just give like if you want to give like a little 1 minute, like where does MDMA or Molly, as we can sometimes call it, land in the landscape of psychedelics and really how you chose it as like the workhorse in your toolkit?
Well, it's almost a shame that they call it a psychedelic because there's no hallucinations. You just feel like your most loving, open self. So it's really the best medicine as far as I'm concerned for therapy, and I'm a former psychotherapist. LSD is really good for opening up your vision of what spirituality or alternate realities are. Psilocybin mushrooms, the same. Ketamine can be used therapeutically. So it's great that we have all these different medicines that really have different uses. But I do believe that having tried pretty much all of them, that MDMA or Molly, whatever you want to call it, is the best for doing interactive psychotherapy or interactive trauma work, anxiety, depression, or couples work.
Yeah, because it seems to be like you can hold a container and have some conversation within it. People aren't so lost in the sauce that there isn't connectivity there.
Yeah, in fact,
Yeah.
you're more connected than you've ever been in your whole life. A story that is in the book, which you probably heard, which I really enjoy telling, is my parents were concerned that I was dealing with this illegal drug, and they said, "Why are you focused on it?" And I said, "Well, it's like magic." So they said, "Well, what's it like?" I said, "The best way to know is really to try it." Well, they were conservative, so I didn't expect them to say, "Oh yeah, okay." But they said, "Okay, we'll try it. You've been at this for 30 years or whatever." So I give them medicine, tell them how to take it. And a year later, I asked them, "Do you ever take the medicine?" They said, yeah, we took it. I said, "What happened?" And they said, "Nothing, it didn't work." They said, "Well, we waited like 20 minutes and we didn't feel anything." Well, it usually takes about 45 minutes for it to kick in. So I said, "Well, what happened after the 20 minutes?" And their eyes lit up. They said, "Well, it ends up we had no plan. So we just sat on the couch and we ended up having the best night of our entire marriage." Yeah,
And you're like, hmm.
we talked about how much we loved each other and how grateful we were, and then we had had some arguments the prior week about some issues, and we worked all that out really quickly, and then we cuddled, and the only disappointment was that the medicine never took effect. Of course, I'm laughing the whole time because that's the effect of MDMA, Molly. Makes you feel really connected, open, loving, and that's the best place to do any kind of therapeutic work.
Yeah, so beautiful. And I think we lean into calling it like an empathogen, right? I guess if we're going to label it more, something that
Yeah.
brings up more empathy for people, more connection. And so that's sort of like that nails down what goes on with your parents, because this was something too, as I got into the work and all the kind of work that I do. I throw people in cold water as well, ice baths and frozen lakes. And so my mother, who's a bit more conservative, is always like, what? I just don't know what you do for work. All of this work feels really crazy. And I recently finally got her in a cold tub. So one thing at a time, I've sent her, a few books. Yours is next on the list. First, she got pollens and it's all coming.
Yeah.
But just when it comes to the stigma around these medicines or just legality, regulation, this is a conversation to really, I think, have around the therapeutic use of, and, your thoughts and feelings. I was very much if I'm going to do this work, whatever the work is, whether it's ice baths or whether it's working in plant medicines, I'm going to be open about it. I'm going to be open about it with my family that I'm doing this so that it doesn't feel, there's no energy around it being hidden.
Yeah.
Because it's such powerful medicine. And I've seen so many beautiful, and my story specifically when I spoke about, when I first learned about utilizing these things therapeutically, I've been doing breath work and cold exposure and various different, bringing tools and sitting service and trip sitting in ayahuasca circles and all different types of psychedelic circles, but being the person who cooked or who cleaned up after people, who supported people, who did breath work in the in-between days, put people in ice baths, which it doesn't happen a lot in the psychedelic space. And of course, not when people are in medicine,
Yeah.
but really boosting neurochemistry and oxytocin and getting the collective to kind of get together. And so I got to see those spaces for so long. And then when I went through what I just loosely call my dark night of the soul, I felt like I have all these tools. I'm a nervous system coach. I'm really all in on this. And I just couldn't get to the other side of the anxiety, to the depression, the suicidal ideation that was coming up. It felt so profound, and it felt like I have the water and I have the pot, but I can't make it boil. I can't figure this out. And so that's when I really leaned into more of this psychedelic landscape to say, how can I get out of my own way?
Yeah.
To see where I'm really at. And again, this is what I think is important and why you're even on the show, is with someone who has the chops and skills and ability to really guide the session well and prompt people in a way. I think that this is the beauty of it, right? Prompt people in a way that will open them up more to the possibility of sharing and empathy and realizing their stories and standing on their own, their innate power, their innate beauty. So
yeah. I kind of liken it to brain surgery, because you're going deep into the psyche and you want to make sure somebody has experience with that. You don't want, if you're having brain surgery, you don't want somebody yeah, I've never done this before, but let's give it a try,
Totally.
So
Totally.
it's
All of your
real.
background, it's beautiful too, right? To have a background in psychotherapy because you've got so many tens of thousands of reps in and really working with different cases.
Different people need different things. So I have a lot of different techniques I use. And part of my job is to find out what helps them experience more peace, love, and joy. And it's different for different people. For some people it's meditation, for some people it's prayer, for some people it's breath work, for some people it's ice bath. I have a list of 164 methods I'm aware of. And part of the journey is trying out different things to see what really clicks for somebody. And when they find something that really clicks for them, then they have a friend for life.
The other powerful thing that you said was, I can do what I could do over the course of 2 years of talk therapy. I could utilize psychedelics as an additional tool when it's right for the people, their nervous system and everything to really get sort of compact that down, right? Make a real efficient creation of space for that person in their body or their psyche even. And so, I just want to explore that, right? Because I never like to say, I think talk therapy has its place, but I think that we're learning more and more that additions of these other tools in the process of that all can be really big wins. And so I just wonder if you would unpack that a little bit too, just your thoughts for people who are listening who are but I've had a therapist, or I've done EMDR 40 times, or I'm working with all these other traditional modalities, and why we might add in things that are a bit more non-traditional. You and I don't think this is non-traditional, but the rest, 80% of the world still does, and probably the powers that be do as well.
Well, think of it as layers of mind that talk therapy deals with more of a superficial layer And things like EMDR or psychedelics or MDMA in particular deal with deeper levels of mind that you really gain to more of the root of the problem. So, we all have distressing thoughts or emotions. The question is, how do you change your relationship to them? Or how do you heal them effectively and efficiently and also cost effectively? 2 years of therapy costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time. I do most of my MDMA work, almost all of it over Zoom. So it's very convenient. And people are surprised to hear that this works over Zoom. I would never do any of the other psychedelics over Zoom. They're too unpredictable. But in
Mm-hmm.
the, say, 650 MDMA sessions I've done, no one has had a bad experience. And no one has had any really trouble because it's a very, well, they called it ecstasy for a reason. They didn't call it, out of controlness, they
Mm-hmm.
called it ecstasy. And so it's very convenient and cost effective and efficient. And I think that's what people want nowadays. They don't want to necessarily depend on a therapist for the rest of their life.
So predominant use is MDMA. You're having this connection with your clients, and then of course there's like client privilege and all of that, considered. I'd love for you to, and I know you speak about this briefly in the book, but I think one really beautiful tidbit about you is we're navigating the landscape of regulation with these medicines, as we call them, right? When it's like scheduled drugs and all these things, and how some of your clientele may be out of the perspective of what people might think are the standard clientele, right? I think there's a bit of a notion here and there that people who are bleeding neck and in the really challenging positions, or they're like having a tough time, but that you've been working with people who are some of those people in the space of regulation, in the space of conservatism.
Rick Doblin of MAPS has done great work in terms of looking at the studies that show that this is more effective than any other therapy they've done,
Mm-hmm.
much more effective than antidepressants or talk therapy, things like that. So I think science is good. In terms of legality, that's more of a political thing that goes on. I did my master's thesis on the effects of MDMA when it was legal, 1984, and then they made it
Wow.
illegal. So I never got that study published, but eventually it'll be made a medically prescribed drug. The problem really has to do with big pharma stands to lose billions of dollars when that happens because they sell antidepressants that don't really work very well. So it'll eventually happen. It's almost happened a year ago, but a lot of politics stepped in at the last minute. What will probably happen is that this Zoom type of MDMA therapy, because so effective and efficient, is going to become more popular. When the FDA does approve of it, eventually, there'll be medical clinics that will be quite expensive, but that will get the word out that this is safe, it's effective, and
Mm.
and be more mainstream at that point.
Yeah, yeah. I've had the blessing of sort of working too with a retired police detective lately, and it's an interesting thing to watch people who are navigating. Like the PTSD landscape is so important. I think it's my point.
Yeah.
Watching people navigate the type of trauma that we know is coming from a job like that, And I know that you've had the beautiful opportunity to work with so many people on the force as well. And it's just do you see some of sort of the biggest lessons and learnings around you're in the trenches. So the biggest lessons and learnings around people who have been in the landscape where they're actively in some way choosing by their job title that they're, in front of these atrocious acts, and how have you seen that sort of move the needle just in your experience? 'Cause I know we're researching it like crazy, but I think it'd be nice to just speak briefly to it, someone who's seen so much.
Yeah. People often say, "Oh, are you worried about, the fact that you're doing a illegal drug, working with it?" I say, well, no, because, a fourth of my clients are police officers. I think I'd bring down the entire LA police force if ever I got in trouble. It's really incredibly powerful to watch somebody who has been traumatized by their job to see that healed in a day. And
Mm-hmm.
politically, actually, police officers, firemen, and veterans are the people who are most active in trying to make this now a legally prescribed medicine. It's kind
Yeah.
of turned normally they're the ones enforcing these things, but they're saying we got to make this legal because, we need access to this to deal with the trauma that we've dealt with.
Yeah. And I think it's wild to see how much more it's in the popular view, right? Even if we're talking about a more traditional psychedelic like magic mushrooms or psilocybin, and Brian Johnson saying, okay, I'm going to take 5 grams on Instagram and report in, and then I'm going to do a live that everybody can kind of watch while I'm taking 5 grams of mushrooms. And like, I think not to sensationalize it in some way, but I think his hope is to normalize it in more ways than sensationalizing it. And yeah, just also being, I think, having enough reach, knowing that it can land for people, having enough audience in the health space, knowing that it can land for people. And yeah, and like really in a way that feels more safe. And so speaking to that safety and responsibility piece, it's like, do you have something that you think you wish more people would do when it comes to safety and responsibility about setting up sessions like this or utilizing these medicines, specifically MDMA, that you're seeing like people aren't doing? Maybe when they come to you, they're like, oh, I did this thing. I thought it was going to help, but I didn't quite do it in a safe and responsible way, that you would advise our listeners?
I do an MDMA training. It's probably the most popular MDMA training in the world. Over 500 people take it. And it's, 50 hours of material. It's, a lot about contraindications, a lot about safety, a lot about how to get good medicine, a lot about therapeutic techniques, a lot about working with couples. It's not something that people, it gets a bad name, all the psychedelic work, if you just go to somebody that says, yeah, I can do this, but you wouldn't do that with your health, hopefully. You want somebody to know what they're doing. So I do this training. If people are interested, they can go to mdmatraining.net. In fact, we're offering your listeners $200 off. If they use the coupon code WellPower200, they get $200 off the normal price of the training.
Thank you so much for doing that. More people and more facilitators are stepping into intentional psychedelic journeys and peak experiences for healing, growth, and reset right now. But there's still been no clear standard for supporting the body through these experiences. That's why Vessel was created. The founders saw the gap: no trusted, science-backed supplement protocol to prepare the body before a journey, support it during, and help it recover and integrate afterward. So they built Lovestack, a 3-phase system designed for the full arc of the journey. And this isn't theory. In under a year, 700 real users in real-world journeys, 95% reported more stable mood afterward, and it's grown entirely through word of mouth. I probably imagine this is one of the first ads you'll have ever heard for it. Facilitators, practitioners, therapeutic users, intentional users are recommending it to each other because it works. This is a supplement protocol that spans the course of 3 or 4 days. It's not about intensity, it is about doing the journey well. If you value preparation, integration, and real support, go check it out at myvessel.co. See what it's all about, because every journey needs a co-pilot.
So I do think training and safety need to be the number 1 and number 2 priority so that this space gets the respect it deserves. And luckily with MDMA, though, people really don't have bad trips if they're actually using real MDMA. The problem is that some of the MDMA out there is not real MDMA. And then people can have a bad trip with bath salts or methamphetamine, things like that. So I do help people get real medicine that I work with. And I know that if they get real medicine, unlike things like ayahuasca or LSD or magic mushrooms that sometimes lead to challenging trips, people don't seem to have challenging trips on real MDMA.
Yeah. What I see sometimes is people who are excited about some kind of work, therapeutic group setting, et cetera, something that's a bit more reverence than a recreational use, are excited and they come to the table and say, okay, I'm going to do this or take this or what have you with friends or trip sitters, someone who may be either less experienced, or plenty of facilitators out there aren't checking. I'm surprised to see like intake forms where someone comes and shows up and they're on a medication that's either contraindicated and there's no washout period, or they're on something that's like just going to blunt what happens. And then they're like, well, nothing really happened. And then it's just like, you're putting this thing in the body that's going to cause oxidative stress. Why would you do that anyway? They don't know what they don't know. But I think that's an important shout out, is to say, be really hyper aware that there are contraindications. It's not for everybody. There's people will work with their doctors, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, the number 1 contraindication for MDMA, although there are others, is if you're on antidepressants or SSRIs, the two drugs blunt each other, so you wouldn't really feel much. But I make sure people take thorough intake. And when there are questions, I actually have a well-known medical doctor who will give them more thorough examination to know if it is correct for them. But other than the SSRI problem, most people who are relatively okay, it's a fine medicine for them to take.
Yeah. And then you were also just speaking to like the efficacy or the sourcing of the medicine. And I'd love if you were open to it for you to share the story that you shared with our group about when you sent off a package to someone and they flip-flopped what you sent them, so that you were going to talk about supplementation and Molly, because I think it's such a great story for people to hear, because it's like, what kind of change do you want? Like your power of belief.
Yeah. In all the psychedelic work, they talk about set and setting. And in my training and in my work with individuals and couples, I make sure that there's I know all the issues. I set it up right well so that they're going to have a great experience, right psychological set. Well, one time, one of my clients got both MDMA and some magnesium, which is sent to them to counter some of the jaw tightening that can happen when on MDMA. Well, little did I know he had taken the magnesium instead of the MDMA during our session together, which is 5 hours. And I'm guiding him, and he's like as high as a kite, thinking like, this is the best experience I've ever had. Well, the next morning I get an email from him saying that you tricked me. And I didn't know what this, and that I should call him. So I call him, I go, what's up? He said, you tricked me. I took that magnesium after our session, and evidently that was the real MDMA. So my entire 5 hours with you was on magnesium. And I thought that was funny, because just having the proper set and setting made it so that we had some really great breakthroughs, even though he had not actually taken MDMA during that session.
So wild. I think it's like so beautiful as well. It's like speaks to his vulnerability and his readiness and his nervous system. And then also, I think, what was the day he took the quote unquote magnesium that was really Molly? What was that day like for him?
Well,
like,
that
was
was
he like,
right, that was right after our session. He was up all night,
it's
also
wild.
high.
Maybe just like reaffirming the things that you had just covered. It's almost like a big, mental journaling exercise. So, and so it's just funny and it's beautiful. And it's like a placebo can be real, and our belief system can get us to that space where we're willing to be open-hearted in that way.
We all have love and peace inside of ourselves, but we often don't know how to get there. So MDMA gives you that vision, that experience. And once there, I often ask people a lot of questions as to what their recipe is for feeling that peace and love, so that they can hopefully duplicate some of that when they're not on the medicine.
People show up with resistance. People show up with fear. People, I think, recognize that this medicine may make them feel vulnerable, and they perhaps have had already built a relationship with you or a certain comfort level with you, of course, if they're going to be working with you. But many people are really, I think, still afraid of like opening emotional doors for things they've kept, doors they've kept closed since childhood for decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of, what have you seen happen when people finally allow themselves to feel those deeper pieces? Like, what would you say to someone who's like, oof, there's a lot from my childhood, or there's a lot with my dad, or whatever it might be, and they're like holding it, and then they're going to feel those deeper emotions in a session with you, and it might feel to them like it could explode, or they're afraid of it, or there's a lot of fear around being vulnerable.
One of the things that MDMA does is it reduces blood flow to the amygdala in the brain, which is the part of us that feels fear. So even when people are talking about like the worst traumas or the worst or really personal issues like sexual issues or, God forbid, rape, things like that, there's a peacefulness there. So it's almost like an anesthetic that way that allows the trauma to heal, because you can look at it without the emotional triggering. And that's part of the benefit of MDMA, that it's actually, they may be talking about their trauma, sexual molestation, things like that, and yet they're feeling completely at peace at the same time. So it really is a lot easier than traditional therapy that way, where creating that safety can take a year or more sometimes.
What do you see in nervous system adjustments or change over the time that you're working before and after in your integration process, et cetera? Like, do you see maybe you want to speak to what happens in the nervous system, but what you see as a result of utilizing this medicine in spaces where there's high trauma.
Well, during the session, because of the effects of MDMA, people are usually feeling totally relaxed for like the first time in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to get what are the ingredients of that relaxation so that they can get back there. I do a lot of integration work with people, I meet with them after the session. And really what I'm trying to do is give them the most effective tool so that they can, when fear or challenging thoughts or whatever arise, that they know exactly how to deal with them very quickly. Because we need those tools in our daily life to get us to deal with some of the childhood trauma that is locked in our body. Obviously, The Body Keeps the Score is a major book. And a lot of that trauma is locked in our body. And people need to know a very practical way to handle that for the stuff that the single session doesn't just completely heal right away.
For sure. The integration piece is always I'm always so curious about it because I know that you have an integration plan with people that you work with, but I'd love for you to speak a little bit more to that in sort of a twofold path. And the first thing is really about, I think it's important that people, when they're choosing a facilitator, I just recently had someone have a journey space that I feel like they're like, oh, I'm doing little voice note integration moments. There's really not anything. And I'm not going to use the term unethical, but I would love for you to speak about integration and the importance of it and the importance of people choosing and working with someone who actually cares about that part of the process. Maybe even explaining what integration is, because this is something that you and I throw this term around, but I think some people who are listening might be like, well, what is integration actually?
So integration is, how do you take the insights and the experience that you had while on psychedelics or MDMA and bring that into your life in a way that creates less anxiety, more healing of the trauma, more peace and joy and love, which is really what we're after. And I think that in general, that piece of the puzzle is not stressed enough in psychedelic and MDMA work. In my training, I talk about that a lot and what that looks like. As you know from reading Ecstasy as Medicine, I have some very unusual and unique method to keep people motivated for a long period of time. A lot of people can be motivated during the session or maybe for a week, but can you be motivated to, meditate 10 minutes a day a year later? Can you be motivated to use this very simple 1-minute technique when you start to feel anxious that's going to help you in life? And that requires some good motivational techniques. So I go into that. And once people find a method that works for them, once they can use that for other things like losing weight or all the health stuff that you suggest, because they do require, if you're going to do an ice bath, which is not something I would do, but some people really like it, or any type of exercise, it does require some ongoing motivation in order to make sure that you're doing what really works for you.
And from the landscape of the importance of the time, sort of preemptively, that the morning of or a few hours before the session that they work with you, and let's say the night, the evening, the next day, are you giving people advice around what they should be putting in that, or what they could, or what would be best for them to put in that 48-hour period of time for like supporting integration, since you can't be on the phone with them at all hours?
Yeah. What I found most helpful for that is actually I record the sessions. And I've been surprised at this, so most people listen to those entire recording in the next 2-3 days. And a lot of people say that they learned so much during that recording that was as impactful as the actual session. So they see what worked, they see what their psychology is, they see what I am moving them towards. And they say that was just incredible, just as incredible as the session. So that's what I do. Normally, I meet with them, usually over Zoom, about a week later to go over the plan moving forward that will help them keep up the good results that they got.
Yeah, I love that you record them. And I think you must be like a Zoom Platinum member at this point with all those hours.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I know how much I record, and I'm like, okay. Yeah, and I will do a summary of notes for people sometimes as well, and I highlight parts, like because I'm doing parts work when I'm doing things like that.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a notion of people losing a little bit of the time space continuum dissipates, and they're keeping 10% of what they spoke to you about, but listening to that recording in, let's call it, a clear headspace, sobriety, whatever you want to say. They're listening to that recording when they're not in medicine is going to land in a different way, right? Little aha moments. Oh, I forgot that I said that.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful way too for you to stay in such like an ethical space where it's just like, here's the whole session. This is what I asked you. I think the way that you speak to people and the prompts that you give them are probably just as valid as learning tools for them, or even learning how to speak and prompt other people in their lives interrelationally and things like that. So I love that you do that. It feels like what a great extra added value to be able for people to appreciate and see themselves almost as like an outside third party, right? You're
Yeah.
like listening to yourself. It's enough of like an ego. Okay, this is me. I need to hear what I'm saying. And then also, so like it keeps people with it in this time of like very limited attention span. And then having aha moments because it's actually the psyche speaking to you, or the unconscious, subconscious, whatever you want to call it, speaking to you more than their typical conscious day to day, executive functioning mind. So
Yeah. It's
what
been
a
very
beautiful
powerful.
offering. Yeah.
And very powerful. And like you, I also have an AI summary that they get as
Mm.
well. So, you're trying to get a lot of information in a short period of time. And then, a week later, going over the same insights. It's actually easier to change quickly than it is to change over a couple of years, I think.
Hmm.
And people often have a bias like, oh, I have to go to years of therapy or something. I think it's actually really easier to have a tipping point experience where you go, okay, that really doesn't work. And I see this a lot. People have been abusing drugs for years or doing some kind of very detrimental behavior. And when they see it clearly with no excuse and they know an alternative, it's sobering and they actually just change. And it's really an honor to watch that process when that happens.
This is the honor of doing the work, right? Being able to be the witness to that transformation, which is like, I don't know if all of your belief system, but I'm always like, when my father passed away, there was like he wrote down little like poems and notes and things he saw in places. He'd write them on this yellow legal pad and have little
Hmm.
tear sheets of things around. He was kind of like an artist on the inside. And there was a piece of paper that said, if you could only see what I see, you'd know how amazing you are. And it was like a quote from someone, like it's someone famous or whatever, right? That's been around for a while. And to me, it really has continued to like resonate as I sit in sessions or as I see people or I watch people go through this. It's just it's almost like giving your body permission or your psyche permission to step outside of itself and look at it from a different perspective. And maybe you can speak a little to, like, I specifically work with very, it's like IFS, it's a bit of the Richard Schwartz vibe. It's
Hmm.
a little bit of like maybe hypnotherapy that I've learned from Mike Zeller, who's our mutual contact. And I've begun to bring in other tools, some constellation work, some things that, I've practiced in my life as a more personally than professionally, but the intuition of what comes up, right? I think this is something you've honed over years is sitting with someone, whether it be a solo person or a couple, and saying, oh, here's a tool from my toolkit that I know I need to bring in. So I wondered if you could speak about a couple of the tools that you sort of, how you bring them in, how you decide to bring them in, if it's like a lot of intuitive hit, or you're just like, oh, A plus B equals C, this is where I do this thing,
Well, it is largely intuitive from my experience, but I've also seen that, how like a band might have their greatest hits. They know if they play this song, the crowd's going to love it. And
Yeah.
so I have maybe a dozen of those tools. I know they almost always work for people. So
Yeah.
I might start with there to see if it resonates. The good thing about MDMA is a person can use the tool and within 30 seconds, it's clear whether it's resonating with them or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some of the tools that I like are actually things that can be done in 5 seconds.
Mm.
For
Yeah.
example, a lot of people have thoughts that give them trouble, whether it's self-criticism or other types of, might be suicidal thoughts, all kinds of detrimental thoughts. And what I try to do is give people tools so that they can realize that they create some separation between those thoughts or those emotions. How do you do that? Well, here's one very simple thing. It's a mantra that many people have found this really works for them. And the mantra is you have to say it 3 times in a row. and you have to say it with the right tone. So when you have a detrimental thought or self-criticism, or you're locked in a story that just keeps on looping, those looping thoughts, this is what you can say to those thoughts. You go, blah, blah, blah. Now, a little bit of humor really ruins the angst of something, And we've all heard our stories over and over again. If you can just say, okay, I've heard that story, blah, blah, blah. I'm not even interested in it anymore. That can create a space where people don't get locked in those looping thoughts. There's other methods where people can get in touch with their true nature. One example might be, imagine you were just born and you don't know what anything means. You're experiencing sensations, you're seeing colors and sights, you're hearing sounds, but you don't have any opinion that this is good or bad. And just imagining that, because a lot of people experience that on psychedelics, well, you can experience that anytime. Just imagine that everything is new and you're just born and you don't know what anything is. So you're not getting lost in it in the same way. So those are 2 of 164 methods I have, but those are very simple to describe. And also important to help people know how to get back into their heart. A lot of times I'll use pets. And one of the advantages actually of doing this on Zoom is often people have their pets right with them, whereas in my office, they don't. So the love for a dog or a cat, tune into that feeling. Notice how it changes your energy in your body. Notice how you can expand that energy so that when you're not on the drug, you can tap into that energy of love and openness without having to have amazing new person in your life, which can be hard to find. That love is already there. You just need to find your way. And if you love a dog or a cat or a person, learning how to get back to that place very easily and quickly is a great skill to have in life.
When I was having my most trying time for my first sort of larger therapeutic journeys, I had a girlfriend who has a therapy dog say, hey, you want to have babysit my dog sit my dog for a few days. And I had, shout out to Ginger, the dog, and I happened to have her for this session, and it was just the thing that was so mind-blowing, and I guess I should say shout out to Cassandra who lent me her dog, but the thing that was so beautiful and mind-blowing was that dog, I had a 7:30 in the morning start time, so it was crack of dawn, so I got up and walked the dog and fed the dog, and then after that, the dog sat really just with me in my lap, next to me, around me for the entire session, and didn't leave to get water or mingle around the house or have any food. I had left some food out because I thought, well, it's going to be hours, so maybe she'll be hungry. And I went through my entire session. The facilitator left, and I finally sort of was journaling a little and coming a bit more clarity, landing, if you will. And as I sort of took an exhale, and I think she recognized that I was sort of okay and on the other side of it because I had a lot of crying and all the things. So she really stayed with me. There was this nervous system connection or this intuitive knowing of the animal to really care for the human. And then as soon as I was feeling a bit exhaled better, the tears are wiped and I'm a little bit more normalized, she was checked in on me, gave me a lick, and then was okay. And then went off and had food from the food bowl, but didn't the entire rest of the time, just really knew. And so it's a beautiful suggestion to say animals, even your friends' animals, are just, it's a nice reference point, and there is some deep comfort that comes with that as well, especially if I was feeling a lot of anxiety because I thought, what's the dosage going to be? And I'm going to be so high, and I'm going to want to fly off my balcony or whatever. I thought I was going to, some 70s landscape in my mindset of Woodstock or whatever. But I really felt the animal helped me ground. Having a dog there was so beautiful. So thank you for suggesting and saying that, because I think it's a nice perk to have if someone has the capacity to have their cat or their dog or I don't know if it works with a parakeet, but whatever, wherever they have in the house, while you're working with them.
With people, we often have baggage. I love my wife a lot, but occasionally I have baggage with her. I don't have any baggage with my dogs. That's just a pure love relationship. And things like that, especially when you explore that and you figure out how you're creating that experience of unconditional love, that can be a technique for getting back to that place when you're not on the medicine.
Hi, it's Kristin. I've been wanting to crack the door on something and share some of the professional, deeply personal work that I've been doing. As you may or may not have seen in the arc of my journey over the last couple of years, I have begun working with people in the psychedelic therapy landscape. And you might be out there feeling like something deeper is asking to be met in you. And so this little break in the show is directed at you. I have a program called The Inner Quest. It's not a retreat, it's not a ceremony, and it's not an experiment. It's a private, trauma-informed, concierge-style container for people who really are ready to do this work. I'm so honored that I get to guide individuals and couples through transformational breathwork and these types of modalities inside an 8-week structure that includes nervous system preparation, elite supplementation, integration coaching, which is of the utmost importance because we can stand in the doorway of transformation, but if we don't do the integration from what we've learned, we actually don't get ourselves to heal in the same way. And I'm here to be your accountability buddy. I'm not here to chase calm with you. I'm here to build capacity for you to be able to feel, to repair, to hold down even more love and truth, and to step outside of the circle of fear that continues to rise in society. This is really high integrity work. It's not for everyone. It's private, it's personalized. I deeply support you in the process. And I just wanted to interject to say that if you're curious about working with me more directly, if you're truly curious, I would love for you to email me at kristin@wellpower.life. That's Kristin @wellpower.life. Tell me what's calling you forward, and then we can step forward together. I'd love for you, if you are open to it without sharing anything confidential, but to share a story or a moment in your work where you've really witnessed a pretty pivotal transformation to someone's relationship with themselves or someone they love in their life through using this medicine.
Well, I'll share two quick stories. One is I worked with a 92-year-old former Miss America who had been raped by her father every day, pretty much every day, from the time she was 6 to the time she was 18. So she had not slept through the night once since 6 years old. She was 92. And after the MDMA session was her first night of sleeping through the night since she was 6 years old. Because, she could go over that trauma, it could be healed, it could be dissipated in a way that made her body feel safer to be able to sleep. That's one. But, I find my work with couples to be really moving because sometimes couples will come in and they're on opposite sides of the couch and they're not looking at each other. And, there's been infidelity or violence or God knows what. And by the end of the session, they're two humans with love and respect and understanding. And to see that type of healing so quickly back to a place of listening, empathy, and love is, I'm often in tears with them. So it's a very moving experience to watch that.
Yeah. And so for anyone who's thinking about working in that space in their couple and their relationship, would you suggest there's a path through that's like we're doing the solo session with you first and then moving into sort of the couple session? Or do some people just like tear the doors off and say, this isn't working, we're in the 11th hour, fix us, we're not broken, but fix us anyway? Like, is there a path forward? Like, if you could set up the dreamscape for people?
Well, of course, I always do one session at least of getting to know them, seeing what their issues are before we do the medicine. It's all
Separately or together?
together,
Like couple
together
okay,
usually. Yeah. Occasionally, then I'll want to do one session with a person, but it's usually, MDMA does a lot of the heavy lifting, and also I've been a couples therapist for 40 years, so that helps. So I haven't found it really necessary to do more than one prior session. I do sometimes find it necessary to do more than one after session to integrate what they got from it, because they do have to change some, usually communication methods that really aren't working.
Yeah. It's a great lesson to layer into that.
We don't get any training on how to communicate in a way that's loving and non-defensive. So a lot of times people on MDMA are experiencing that form of, it's like speaking a new language for the first time. And then they listen to it and they go, oh my God, yeah, that usually would have been a 3-week argument, and we covered it in 3 minutes,
Mhm.
or, people often don't talk to their partner about what they like sexually. On MDMA, that's like talking about the weather. Hey, this is what I want. Yeah, okay, that sounds good. This is what I want. Great. Okay, we're done.
And you're like, oh my goodness, I've been holding that for 12 years because I've been afraid to ask you. And I think like just seconding that in some ways, I have an episode of this podcast that's two women. They're like spiritual counselors. They do conscious, compassionate communication, and they're beautiful. The work they do is amazing. I wouldn't necessarily say they're like famous, right? But it is my number one listened to episode. It's like people wanting to get more understanding of how to have compassionate, conscious communication. And that's across a lot of different relationships. But of course, your primary partner is going to be the biggest thorn in your side in many beautiful ways, right? This is potentially what we do for each other. We poke each other's wounds so we can grow together.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, it's just still to this day, it's like my number one. My Peter Crone may surpass this. You and I might surpass it. You start talking about MDMA and Molly, everybody wants to listen. But up until this point, it's my biggest listen to episode. So I think that there's really something strongly to be said for people understanding to learn how to do that.
Yeah. I want to give your listeners something free that might help them that way.
Cool.
At my website, XTC, the letters XTC as medicine.com, if they put in their email address, they get what's called the 12 questions that leads to instant intimacy with anyone. And people are amazed at how well this works. They work with anyone, your daughter, your lover, your boss, and they really are amazing. So I recommend that people...
And you said it's what, xtc.com, the 3 letters?
xtcasmedicine.com.
XTC as medicine, like the book. Got it.
Yeah.
Great. So everybody can get it in the show notes. Everybody can get it in all the pages where we list everything on my website, because that will be, I think, a big hit for them. Do you want to give a little shout out as we're talking about this couples piece to this book that you're about to be sharing?
Yeah, well, the book is called Ecstasy for Couples, and it talks about my work, how I work with couples. I also talked about how you can do ecstasy on your own with your partner without a guide, and all the contraindications, all the things that you need to know to have a really good experience. Strangely, ecstasy became famous as a couples therapy drug in the 1970s. Most people don't know that. And then it got into the rave scene and, went on from there. But therapists...
Because when it was a couples therapist drug, it was regulated. It was allowed, right? It was legal to use it that way in the beginning. Yeah.
Therapists were using it and finding, incredible breakthroughs using it with couples. But there had never been a book written about it. And so I said, well, hey, I had written a book called Communication Miracles for Couples that Oprah, when I was on her show the first time, said, this is the best couples book I've ever written. So it became a big bestseller. I did a lot of couples therapy. But I figured, hey, with that background and my ecstasy background, I should write the book on how to use this drug with couples. And I'm proud of it. And couples are having a hard time nowadays. It's a tough time for couples. It's a stressful age to begin with. And then, we're told that this person's going to solve all your problems, which of course they're not. And we never learn how to communicate effectively. So when couples have that first experience of communicating really well and being back in love, it's just an amazing thing to watch.
Super. I think everyone needs to download your info so that they can get all their bonuses and share their info with you. And and for anyone who's facilitating out there or listening to this, who's like wanting to step forward into facilitation, I think, working with you in your course makes so much sense because it's like what I want for the world. We need more facilitators more than ever, especially as the dawn of AI is landing, and really understanding, how to hold space for people. This phrase we all overuse in Austin, how to hold space for people, how to get set and setting right, and really how to structure your capacity as someone who may be wanting to step into a facilitator role or a guide or a sitter. It's paramount that people are doing it. There's such a high level of responsibility, like even more than I could have imagined. And I already walked into the door of this like, hey, I want to be one of the most responsible facilitators when it comes to safety and efficacy and sourcing and all of that. And I think you doing this for so long and being such a leader in the space is just really, it's the most credible win that we can have. So I really, really appreciate you, offering these things, putting them together, the journey that you've taken for a lifetime to really be able to share with all of us, your wisdom. It's highly valuable. I'm sure that you hear that a lot, but I'm going to say it out loud here anyway as well.
Well, I'm very grateful to people like Rick Doblin that have been at this in the trenches, and they inspire me, and I just feel very fortunate that I get to do this work.
I want to touch on one more thing, and then I'll ask you kind of the final question of the show. But I'd love for you to speak a little bit about the future of psychedelic therapy. And I think the underpinning I want you to consider in answering that question, or what you think the future of psychedelic therapy is also we're living in this time and age right now where people are having many different thoughts. We don't need to go into the politics, but about the government, many different thoughts, fears even arising around artificial intelligence, and just, the landscape of our future being so fast paced. It's so quickly moving. And perhaps 2 years from now, we won't even know what the world can look like. Like, no one can really predict that.
Mm-hmm.
And in this time of unrest or heightened states of fear, just like what and how do you think psychedelics will sort of branch more into, and this use of MDMA will branch into what's happening as we shape our future?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think that psychedelics are becoming more mainstream now because people need to adapt quicker to a ever-changing and ever more stressful world. So we need better tools to do that, and therefore psychedelics are a big part of that. I also think that it's going to branch out into, especially with AI and lack of personal human contact that we crave, that people are going to especially want MDMA because it is such a connection tool that way. And I think my work in doing most of it over Zoom will become more popular just because it's more convenient, it's more cost effective, and doesn't involve, travel. And it also seems to create better outcomes, which surprised me because the level of safety becomes extreme. If a woman has been, say, dealing with trauma like rape, and I'm asking her to come to my office and take a drug and sit on my couch, that's a little worrisome for a lot of
Yeah.
people. But
Yeah, for her
Zoom does
system.
create
Yeah.
that safety, and so does the MDMA. So I think a lot of it will move towards that model as well. And there'll be other models, like the MAPS has a model. I have a model that's much more therapeutic, interactive. But I think people are even going to try to use AI as facilitators, and we don't know what that will look like. So I think there'll be a lot of experimentation and exploration, and then we'll eventually see this seems to work and this seems not to work.
So many expansions, and I think all of it is really good news. And I'm really thankful that the medicine and the psychedelic landscape is having this renaissance right now. And it's also it feels timely that it's working in tandem or in parallel to everything that's going on with technology advancements. To me, it's like the bubble up is happening together as if this were planned.
Evolution is hopefully,
evolution.
yeah, evolution is accelerating.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to close the show when I have special guests like you. I like to close the show with these like 10 quick fire questions, which come from the Actors Studio, which actually come from Bouillon de Culture. So you may know all of these things just from the era that you and I grew up in. And I'm going to lean into them with you for those right now.
Sounds great.
Okay, perfect. So what is your favorite word?
I think you have to go with the word love. People who have near-death experience, they come back, they say it's really all about learning how to love better.
What is your least favorite word?
Politics.
That's a good answer.
Well, politics is partly our ego politics of power and who's on top and all that. It's just where we deal with that a lot.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Well, those are three different turn-ons. I love creating stuff, and I love seeing people breakthroughs. So those are always guiding lights for me.
Something that turns you off.
Let's see. I think when I see people be unkind or do things that are hurting people, that hurts my heart.
What is your favorite curse word?
Favorite curse word? Boy, I'll say the F word, okay? I think, when you're really mad at somebody, that's a way to really get out.
Yeah, just to really put it out there.
Yeah.
What sound or noise do you love?
I notice when I'm high on drugs, I'll often make this sound. It sounds like this. Yeah.
I love that. I'm so glad I probed that question there.
Yeah, so yes, but it's a yes from the soul out to the universe.
What sound or noise do you hate?
You know, when they have really loud motorcycles go by you and your entire body vibrates, you wonder, how is that legal? This guy could disturb an entire city block. I don't like that sound.
Amazing. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I wanted to attempt to be a rock star, but I had no talent, luckily. Otherwise, I would have given it a shot. But I do like writing
Would you be like
songs.
a singer or a guitar player? What's the arena? Which role?
Well, I have no talent singing, and I'm a lousy guitar player. So luckily, I had both those things working against me, which allowed me to not spend 30 years trying to do that one.
Amazing. I love that. I have the weirdest answer to that question that I always think of. It's like, if I had to come back in one profession, it would absolutely be a race car driver.
That's a good
It's
one.
like, where did that come from? I mean, it's just in my genetics to want to drive a fast Formula One car or something. What profession would you not like to have?
So many of them. I feel so honored that I get to do this. You look at people and they're doing, they're flipping burgers or they're doing the same thing day after day. I really have compassion for all those professions that are the same day after day. That would be tough for me.
And if heaven exists, or whatever form of the universal energy you want to call in, what would you like to hear God or the universe say to you when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Job well done.
Well, I mean, I think you've already accomplished that in so many ways. So you're in for a good ride, Jonathan.
Kristin, same to
Yeah,
you.
I'm so thankful to have you on the show. I'm so thankful to get to know you better. Just like your sweetness, the love pervades into the spaces that you bring it, your program. I'm excited to get more involved with your program and your certification. I want all the listeners here to kind of go to that website we gave and all the show notes to really like look into the work that you're doing, because there's so much to be learned, around the medicine space and even without the medicine, there's so much to be learned from you. So it's such an honor to be here with you today. And will you just shout out where people can find you one more time, website or handles on Instagram or whatever you feel like?
Sure. Well, the easiest one that has a lot of free stuff is xtcasmedicine.com. And if they're interested in the training, mdmatraining.net.
Perfect. Beautiful. Okay. Well, more soon. Keep up the good work, will you?
Yeah, and people can reach me through the website XTC as Medicine. So if they want to email me personally, I return emails and I take people reaching out in that way very seriously because I think it's sacred work.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristin.
Yes, thank you for joining us here on Well Power. You can submit questions, learn more, shop incredible brands, and connect with me at wellpower.life or follow me on social at biohacking.breath.cold. From comfort to courage, friends, we're doing it. Any foul language you hear is not approved by my mother.